Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd. And it's time for a review of the new St. Vincent record, self-titled St. Vincent record. This self-titled record is the fourth full-length LP from singer-songwriter and guitarist extraordinaire Annie Clark, whose music deals heavily in art pop, chamber pop, indie pop, with each new release getting a little more abrasive, abstract, experimental, a little noisy, not too harsh, not too experimental, because on some of St. Vincent's best records like Actor and Strange Mercy, she maintained her pop appeal. I think Annie sort of hit a creative peak on her last LP with a number of songs like Cruel and Cheerleader and Northern Lights, tracks that bring buzzing, bulky, and sometimes brittle guitars together with Annie's beautiful voice and some really heavenly, effervescent strings and synths. So thus far I've never really had a reason not to be excited for a new St. Vincent record, especially with each new album getting a shade weirder. And I've been head over heels for nearly every song that has dropped from this LP thus far. Songs like Digital Witness and Bertha Reverse, tracks that are lyrically and conceptually clever, and instrumentally glitchy, textured, and groove-wise sort of herky-jerky. The song Bertha Reverse has all these really jagged, punchy guitar riffs that remind me of something sort of like off of one of the first two Devo records, but pushed past the edge of insanity. And a lot like Devo, the music here is most definitely rock, but very electronically tinged. There are drums on this record that sound live and sound intense, but there are moments here where the beats feel sort of looped, or stiff, or even synthetic. Maybe a feel that sort of carried over from the recent collaboration St. Vincent did with David Byrne. There are really prominent synthesizers all over this record, and the guitars, while, they sound like guitars for the most part, they are just cooked down to the point where many of the guitar tones that you're hearing just feel like nothing but ultra grimy digital distortion. It's interesting that some of Annie's most animalistic lyrics and vocal deliveries land on such cold, rigid instrumentation. While there are some songs on here that have great grooves and are really catchy, like Digital Witness, I think for the most part, St. Vincent tries to intentionally suck the viscera out of rock music. And for the most part, I think it's a really great success, like with the opener here, Rattlesnake, where the drums feel like they're being played through a sewer pipe. There's some really rough, distorted synth sequences that are pretty funky playing throughout the track too. And then on top of that, there are all these sound effects littered across the song. But even in all of this chaos, we get a really catchy, concise tune that does a great job of setting the tone for the record. And to mention Digital Witness again, maybe my favorite track on this entire LP, really smart lyrical satire about the internet generation's vanity. This track has one of the grooviest bass lines and rhythms on the entire LP, and it's easily one of the most colorful songs on this thing too, even though there are a lot of sounds on here that feel so rough and just manipulated heavily. The grimy guitars and synths sit really nicely against the horns and Annie's beautiful vocal harmonies. The harder and poppier tracks on this record for me impress again and again and again, like with the song HUEY, a song that I wasn't too in love with at first, but eventually the very beautiful, unsuspecting intro grew on me, and the way that it explodes into one of the heaviest riffs on the entire album in the second half is really gratifying. And with the song Regret, the guitar riff being played throughout this track feels like a Led Zeppelin riff, sort of turned inside out and retweaked for a noise pop record, which I guess it is. I love the blissful hook on this track too. I think it's a really beautiful contrast from the distorted, heavier spots on this track, even though I do think St. Vincent is putting out her most experimental record yet here. I don't think she loses sight of making sure she balances these harsher moments out with at least some elements of beauty. And I also love the song Psychopath, one of my favorite tunes on this record, and I love the really repetitive, driving, krautrock-esque beat on this thing too. I think the only song on this record where Annie really goes overboard a little bit is on Bring Me Your Loves, which essentially sounds like an alien race of St. Vincents coming down and violently abducting everyone in a spaceship to take them off into a very faraway galaxy to love them until the end of time. Oh, baby. You're right. That sounds kinda nice. But the music itself feels so hellish with its grimy bass lines and tractor beam synthesizer leads. Annie manipulates her vocals on this track pretty heavily with a very dissonant chorus vocal hanging in the background. And then the rhythm on this track is like a combination between a marching band and an Amazonian drum circle. And the lyrics on this track may be some of the most eye-widening or gripping on this entire LP in that they are very forceful and subtly kinky. Part of me feels like this track is just freakish fun. Other parts of me, it sort of leaves a bad taste in my ears. Either way, I think the really apocalyptic, ethereal synthesizers toward the back end of this track really sort of brings this cacophonous instrumentation together really nicely. However, the zaniness really takes over on the track Every Tear Disappears, which has one of the weirdest instrumentals on this entire LP, and along the way in making this mess of a musical backdrop, St. Vincent fails to bring a decent tune. Not only are the farty synthesizers and the really stiff drums not that interesting, but hearing St. Vincent sing so beautifully over this instrumental just feels kind of awkward. I guess there are moments on this LP where really harsh, rigid, cold backdrops of music fit against the very human vocals and create an interesting mix. There are other moments on here where, I think that's the case for nearly every single ballad, too, on this LP, unfortunately. Songs like Prince Johnny and I Prefer Your Love. I love the tunes on these tracks, and I think St. Vincent does a great job of singing on them as well. Not to mention that Prefer Your Love is probably one of the more lyrically gripping tracks on this LP too. But when Annie is singing on these tracks, in search of that theatrical spotlight that's typically there in her songs, the instrumentation in the background is just way too stiff to embrace her and lift her up where she belongs. The closest I think St. Vincent comes to doing a great ballad with this colder, icier style is the closing track on here, which, despite its very stiff instrumentation, is also sort of heavenly and pastel colored. It's very synth heavy like many other songs on here, but there's some great vocal harmonies, some huge ringing bells in the background, and some wonderful plucked arpeggios too. And all of these things fill in the gaps that are typically there on some of the more toned down songs here. It's also a song where I find myself sort of curious and wanting to dig into the backstory behind the lyrics on this track too. Overall, I did like this LP. I think this record has some of her best songs yet, but also easily one of her worst. And while I admire St. Vincent greatly for coming together with this really experimental pop and rock record, not every experiment, in my opinion, goes over really well. I do prefer Actor to this. I do really prefer Strange Mercy to this, which still continues to be my favorite St. Vincent record, but I don't really feel terribly let down by what happened on this LP. I did get at least a few of what I think are some of the best songs of the year out of it. I'm feeling a decent to strong 7 on this thing. Transition, if you've given this album a listen, what did you think of it? Did you love it? Hate it? Why? What do you think I should review next? And that's it. Anthony Fantano, St. Vincent, self-titled, forever.